Good afternoon, everybody. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us. I know many of you are still joining us, so feel free. Some of our MBK communities are in a chat room with us, so please feel free to introduce yourselves, welcome yourself as you come in. My name is Michael Smith. I'm Executive Director of the My Brother's Keeper Alliance at the Obama Foundation, and I am delighted to welcome you to our My Brother's Keeper Alliance Town Hall series. Which will today be focused on mental health and wellness and what the American Psychological Association has dubbed as a racism pandemic. Before we go any further, it is important to acknowledge that today would have been Breonna Taylor's 27th birthday. She should be here celebrating with us. Today, across our channels, we are saying her name and we are honoring the work towards justice for Breonna Taylor. Her friends and her family members said Breonna was a caring person who loved her job as an EMT and a healthcare worker and enjoyed playing cards with her aunts. She is our sister, she is our daughter, she is our niece, and we remember her and we cherish her memory. And we cherish the way too many women of color whose names are not spoken, who've gone unnoticed and unheard. And right now, before we go any further, I not only want to encourage you to go to obama.org to find out how you can donate to the Breonna Taylor Memorial Fund and other actions that you can take, but I want to take a brief moment of silence in which all of you that have access to our chat window, I encourage you to write the names of the young women who have been taken from us, who have been killed, who have been forgotten, that we should remember. For those of you who can't speak Breonna's name, speak those names where you stand. So please join me in a moment to remember Breonna. Thank you, MBK family. And I think we all know that the MBK family is not just about words, but we're about action. So please go to obama.org, not only speak her name, but take actions to make sure we remember her, that we take care of her family, and that we seek justice for her life. Today's space and today's town hall will allow us to reflect on the emotional and mental toll racism and police violence has on men of color and our families, and the steps that we need to take to stay well, whole, and healthy while we work to create a better world. You know, My Brother's Keeper firmly believes in our responsibility to be intersectional in everything that we do, knowing deeply that our hopes, our fears, our dreams, and our triumphs are inextricably linked to our sisters and our family members across gender and race. We believe that in word and deed, and as we lift up leadership and voice of sisters and allies and advance programs and policies that advance the life and liberty of all members of our communities. In today's town hall, we decided to intentionally create a space, a unique space where men of color and boys of color could talk about the challenges and opportunity that they face in America, to center their voices and really think about the toxic masculinity that often makes it hard to talk about these issues in a world that tells them that they aren't supposed to hurt. So I'm going to go ahead and start off these conversations with legends and heroes who have been at the front lines of social justice, working through way too much pain for way too long, and also with some of our young leaders that are just getting started in this work today. And to start off this conversation, we have an incredible moderator, Darnell Elmore. And if you look closely enough, you can see Darnell's book, No Ashes in the Fire, Coming of Age, Black and Free in America, on my bookshelf, which was listed as a 2018 New York Times notable book and a Barnes & Noble Discover Great New Writers pick. Darnell is also a writer in residence at the Center on African American Religion, Sexual Politics and Social Justice at Columbia University, and a 2019 Senior Fellow at the Annenberg Innovation Lab at the University of South Carolina. He has too many accolades and writings and awards in order to go through all of them, but we're thrilled to anchor this conversation today as a powerful young man of color himself. Please join me in welcoming Darnell Moore.
Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you to the Obama Foundation, MBK, for having this conversation in this moment. I'm really glad to be part of it and really, really excited to introduce someone who really needs no introduction at all. That is President Obama. and the intergenerational panelists who will be joining President Obama in conversation, including Congressman John Lewis, Brian Stevenson, Leon Ford, and Laquan McDonald. One of the things I think we should say before we get started is that this conversation is meant to be intimate, communal, and also a space for Black men, for men of color, to experience and model vulnerability. So in that regard, I want to open by marking the time that we're in. This conversation is happening during an unprecedented time. We are gathered during a pandemic and within a period where we have witnessed racial violence. Between COVID-19 and the killings of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, who Michael alluded to, whose birthday is today, and George Floyd, we are in what we might be best described as a storm within a storm. So many of us are not okay. So before we get into really deep conversation, I'd love to start by having us ground ourselves and check in. So I'm going to ask that the conversation partners use one word to describe how you're feeling right now. And President Obama, I'd love to start with you.
Motivated. Faith.
Congress, thank you. Leon. What about Brian?
Honorable.
Determined.
And Laquan.
Propitious.
Oh, that's a big word.
Laquan's coming with the big words already from the start. This is an intergenerational conversation, and it's an opportunity for us to listen and learn and share across generations. And there's much that we can learn from the younger generation. So I want to start with you, Leon. I want you to talk a little bit about your story. It's one of pain and healing. In 2012, you were shot and paralyzed by police during a routine traffic stop. And you've since shared your story widely, and you've taken action by doing things like organizing healing circles. So I want you to talk about what it takes for any of us, for you, to have moved from pain that is a consequence of racism and racial violence to the activism, to using your activism and that pain as a tool for healing and transformation.
Thank you. It takes belief. I had to believe that the world wasn't as bad as my experience. And even though my experience was painful, it was an opportunity for me to step up and use my voice as a way to heal the world. And so, although I was impacted in a very negative way and my life was forever changed, I saw a golden opportunity for me to help others.
Thanks so much. President Obama, I want to turn to you. You've heard from Leon and his testimony of pain and healing. And I'm reminded of your own story of pain, and the context is different. But you've written and talked about the pain that gripped you after losing your dad, after losing your grandfather and mom, and losing your grandma the day before the election. Through loss, you had to lead a nation through recession. How'd you make it through? What gave you the strength to show up, not just for yourself, but for the nation, even though you were moving through the pain of loss?
Well, first of all, I want to be clear that when I hear somebody like Leon speak and what he has gone through and then been able, like a phoenix, to rise out of those ashes. When I think about my dear friend and the inspiration for so much of what I did, John Lewis, and what he faced. I think it's important for us to recognize that, the things I went through pale in comparison to the challenges that Leon's gone through or that John's gone through, and that some of the other people on this panel have gone through. And the reason I bring that up now is because what I have found throughout my life is that my strength comes from connecting my story to other people's stories. So that if I am having a tough time, then I'm thinking back, well, if John Lewis wasn't scared, or if he overcame his fear, then what right do I have to be scared or intimidated? And if somebody like Leon can come out of a horrible experience and somehow deal with his bitterness, then how do I indulge in my bitterness? And I think that, maybe the best example I'll use, just because it's recent and I think everybody is familiar with it, is after the Charleston shootings. And I've talked a little bit about this, but that was coming towards the end of my presidency. And I had already gone through so many mass shootings and watched Congress unwilling to move in any kind of way to curb gun violence in this country. And there is almost a ritualistic quality that had taken place where everybody says the families are in our thoughts and prayers. And there's a gesture towards this should never happen. But then nobody ever does anything. And then when Charleston happened, there's the convergence of a mass shooting and the racial hatred that was at the root of it coming at the same time. And there was a part of me that told my staff, I remember saying this, look, I want to go to the funeral and I want to hug the families. I don't think I want to talk. I don't know what else to say. I feel as if I have run out of words because I've been doing this too much and it doesn't seem to have any impact on me. And I don't want to perpetrate this notion that somehow this is normal. Of course, the families then said, no, we'd like you to at least say something. And so now I'm trying to figure out what to say. And I remember puzzling over it. And then some of you may recall, the family said, we forgive this misguided, hateful young man because that is our faith. Because there's been a Bible study in which this terrible deed had taken place. And I remember thinking about the concept of grace and seeing what those families were displaying in their tragedy. And that's when I came up with and wrote very quickly the speech that I delivered in which I ended up singing. I say that because it was their strength, not my strength, that I was relying on, right? It was their grace that then bathed me in grace. It was the traditions of the church and the memories of, and overcoming that fortified me and is what I tried to transmit in my remarks. So I guess maybe just to summarize, for all of us, usually when I'm overwhelmed, discouraged, angry, depressed, what has lifted me up is when I don't feel alone and I can connect what is going on with me to what is going on with us. And I think that it is a profound thing when you are able to recognize that whatever's happening to you, whatever you're going through, it's not just about you, and you're not the only one going through it. And that usually ends up being a source of power, and then sometimes you can turn pain into joy as a consequence.
Thank you. I want to ask you, Congressman Lewis, you too have a story of pain and resilience. You were present and marching in Selma, 1965. Before and after that, you were beaten while peacefully protesting on what is now known as Bloody Sunday. But that didn't deter you from your continued fight for freedom. And like Leon, like so many others, you faced overwhelming pain as a result of racism or violence, but you continue to show up for community. You continue to show up for the fight anyhow. What was and what has been the source of your strength? What keeps you going and what keeps you fighting?
More than anything, my faith kept me, held me together. And I couldn't give up, could not give in. I thought, when I was being beaten on the bridge, I thought I saw death. I thought I was going to die. And I said a little prayer, saying, Lord, let me live. I want to stay here. I want to be around. And I believe it was the grace of God and praying witnesses that helped save me. And so today I feel more lucky, more than blessed, but to be here, to see the changes that have occurred, to live to see a young man, a young friend like President Barack Obama become president of the United States of America. It was worth the pain. And that's why I believe that we cannot give up, we cannot give in, become bitter or hostile. And to see all of the young people, all of the young men, not just men of color, but Black, white, Latino, Asian American, Native American, all of the young women standing up, speaking up, being prepared to march. They're going to help redeem the soul of America and save our country and maybe help save the planet.
Congressman Lewis, thank you so much. Brian, your story is one that has captured the attention of so many people, and rightly so. You went from being a young lawyer in Alabama who faced many slammed doors. Your first client was executed, but you would end up building one of the most impactful and life-saving human rights organizations in the US and arguably around the world. Through your journey, and those are the people whom you fought on behalf of, what have you learned about trauma and healing and wholeness that you think can be shared across generations?
Well, thank you. And it's such an honor to be a part of this incredible panel. I think one of the things I've learned is that you have to be truthful. You have to be honest about articulating the reality in which you exist, that you can't hide from it. You can't distract yourself from understanding the nature of the problem. When I think about the experience of Black people in this country, we all have stories, but when I think about the experience of Black people in this country, it's a hard thing to face sometimes, that our foreparents were kidnapped and trafficked to this country and then enslaved and chained and beaten and brutalized. And after the Civil War, they were promised freedom, but they didn't get freedom. They got terror and violence. They weren't allowed to vote. They were denied those rights that the Constitution gave them. And then they were pulled out of their homes for nearly a century and lynched and hanged and burned and menaced. And then they had to live in places where the law humiliated them through Jim Crow and segregation. And they were denied opportunities. And they were told that they're not as valuable, they're less deserving, less worthy. And then we moved into this era when so many of us had so much hope. And here we still find ourselves over-policed and over-prosecuted and over-convicted and over-sentenced and marginalized and frequently denied opportunities. And I think we have to have the courage to understand the moment that we are in. But then we have to have the ability to look back and understand our capacity. And that's the thing that amazes me. I was a product of Brown versus Board of Education. I thought that if I did the things they told me to do, I started in a colored school, the lawyers came in and opened up the public schools. I thought if I did all the hard work, that everything was going to be great. There'd be equality. And I did my part, I think. I studied, I went to high school, I went to college, I got admitted to Harvard Law School. I graduated from Harvard Law School. I started practicing law. And I was on the street in Atlanta, Georgia, a few years after graduating, preparing for a case when police officers stopped me. I got out of the car and the police officers pulled their gun. They pointed it at my head and they said, "Move and I'll blow your brains out." And I had to calm those officers down. And I was humiliated by people in the community. And it was painful to me to reckon with this fact that all of that hard work and education didn't shield me from that threat and violence. And I have argued cases at the Supreme Court, and I still go into courtrooms where judges who don't know me will tell me to leave the courtroom and wait until my lawyer gets here. And the reality of that has to be articulated and expressed. Black people in this country are presumed dangerous and guilty, and we have to manage and navigate these presumptions. And I think it's important to admit to the burden of that. And I will tell you, I've gotten old enough now that when you have to keep navigating these things, you get tired. And I'm exhausted of living in a world where we have to navigate all of these challenges. But the other thing that I know is that when I look back, I have something that is really powerful. And what I have is this ability to say, despite all of those things, despite the slavery and the lynching and the segregation and the humiliation and the mass incarceration and the police violence, I am here. And I'm here lifted up by all of these people who did all of these things. I'm the great grandson of people who were enslaved in Virginia. My great grandfather, enslaved in Caroline County, Virginia, learned to read while enslaved because he had this belief that one day he would be free. And he invested in his mind, even though it was dangerous. And when emancipation came, my grandmother told me all of the enslaved people, formerly enslaved people, would come to their home and she would sit next to him, and every night he would read the newspaper. And she loved the power that that created. And she said, I want to learn to read too. And even though there weren't schools, she became a good reader. And she gave that gift to my mother, her youngest of 10 children. And my mother gave that to me. We were poor, but my mom actually went into debt to buy the World Book Encyclopedia because she had this hope that if we feed our mind, we can overcome. And that's the thing I want to say, is that you have to take care of your mind. You have to be aware. You have to understand the world around you. But they didn't stop with that. The other thing they did was they said you have to protect your heart. You know, despite enslavement, people found ways to love one another enough to create another generation. My grandparents were terrorized and fled the American South to the North as exiles and refugees from that violence. And yet they loved one enough to create a generation that might have hope. My parents were humiliated by Jim Crow laws. Those signs that said white and colored, they weren't directions, they were assaults. They created injuries. And yet, in the midst of it, they loved one another to create another generation. And they gave that love to me. And that's why I think to endure all these hard times, you have to have a knowing mind, a curious mind, an informed mind, but you also have to have a full heart, a heart that appreciates the love that brought you here. And when the ideas in your mind are fueled by the convictions in your heart, you become part of this journey that endures. I live in Montgomery, Alabama. I can't help but think about that generation, Congressman Lewis's generation, that had so much less than we have. I'm standing on the shoulders of people who did so much more with so much less. And they would go to places and protest in their Sunday best, and they'd be on their knees praying when they were battered and bloodied and beaten. And then they would stand up and say, we shall overcome. That's the mind and the heart connecting in something that is impossible to defeat. And Black people in this country are undefeated in our resolve that we will be free, that we will demand justice, that we will get there. That's the thing that sustains me. So I think you have to look back, be willing to confront the truth of what you're seeing, and then make your mind full and make your heart full, and let those two powerful parts of you lead you forward.
Thank you, Brian. I'm over here in the amen corner. About to run around my living room like I'm in a church house. Laquan, I want to turn to you, Laquan Muhammad. As we listen to these stories shared by the other panelists, I'm thinking about the ways that injustice and deep pain and inequity and personal loss and triumph can be the forces that move many people towards a fight for justice, equity, and freedom. Your father's incarceration, like that of my own father, has been at the heart of your work as a citizen journalist who helped to pass California Proposition 47, which allows for the downgrading of nonviolent felonies to misdemeanors. That resulted in your dad being released. You literally became the tool for your dad's freedom. I want you to talk a bit about your journey and the lessons learned on that journey that many of us can grab hold of right now.
Well, I'd like to also say thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate talking to you all. And yes, but yeah, well, my journey started like early, like about like high school, my beginning years, 9th and 10th, just messing up, you know, not being the best I could be, getting in trouble, you know, various forms of trouble, law in school, different things like that. And just understanding that I wanted to be better, but just didn't know how. And so it eventually chronicalized into meeting these dudes in the classroom. It was called the Social Justice Learning Institute, Black Male Youth Academy. And so just in there, just trying to understand my traumas and just kind of like address the different oppressions that I'm going through, different things like that. And then like putting that all together and understanding the different disparities that I'm seeing every day in my community, and how can I address that, and how can I become more so a part of the solution and not the problem. And so it just led me into more work. It led me deeper into social justice. We started like working on like youth participatory action research. And so we would just go and survey and do different things, you know, just to kind of like build ideas and stuff like that. And so I just started to kind of like feel it more in myself, like I'm changing things. I'm starting to be different in myself. I'm starting to even understand that, you know, the ways I can help my community better and stuff like that. And so I finally got introduced to Prop 47. We went to a meeting, right, like kind of like by my school, and they introduced it to me then. And I had to do the research on how I could help me out and how I could help my family out. And I seen that it could help my father out because he had went to jail for drug charges. And so all putting this together is kind of like lighting this fire in me. Like I gotta, you know, if I don't jump on it now, I feel like the opportunity will pass me. And so like I immediately, you know, just everything I had in myself and you know, gave it to Prop 47. And so along with also the Obama Foundation, so helped me bring my father home, so that as well. But just all of it was like understanding like the role of, you know, the father and the father not being there, and how it's so detrimental for, you know, not just young men of color, but just men, just children in general, just, you know, not having that discipline or not having that aspect of a father figure to, you know, lean back on, or someone to look forward to or look up to, you know, to have that, you know, that kind of like guidance. It kind of like always was something that I've always questioned. And so I helped it move me at the end and kind of like bring me closer to me and my father and stuff like that.
Thank you so much. I have a question that I want us to ponder. And I'm interested, Leon and Laquana, your thoughts, and also open to hearing from the others, but community healing requires community. Community means all of us, right? And it seems that one of the lessons that we are learning from the generation, this present generation, is the reality that our idea of community has to be so wide, so expansive. Folk are saying Breonna Taylor's name alongside of George Floyd's. They are proclaiming that all Black lives matter, whether those Black folks show up as straight or LGBT. With that in mind, what does a caring and healed community of the future look like? What do we need to build that vision out? I want to ask Leon for you to respond to that, and then I'm going to turn to you, Laquan, and then open it up to some others if you want to.
Thank you. There's an African proverb that reads, "When there is no enemy within, the enemy outside cannot hurt me." And so from my perspective, in order to build a strong community, we need to build strong individuals, right? We need to weed out those, the enemies within our minds and in our hearts, right? That's why I focus on mental health and I go to therapy, which helps me to be a stronger pillar and a stronger man for my son, right? And a respectful son to my parents. It also helps me to be more intentional and healthy as I make my community stronger. And as I help to make my community stronger, I help to make my city stronger. And as I help to make my city stronger, we help to make, my state, Pennsylvania, stronger, which if everyone focus on that, we can make the country stronger. And if every country becomes strong, then the world becomes stronger. We need, more open communication. We need to be more mindful and thoughtful of, everyone's lived experience because we're all carrying trauma. And so I like to lead from a place of love, a place of compassion, and a place of understanding. And that's really what I had to use with my work with police officers, right? I was full of so much hatred, and I had to, tackle that hatred within myself. And so it was hard for me to start with love, working with police officers, so I had to start with understanding. And so I took courses and I learned about the history of policing in this country, which helped me understand, how they were trained, the policies and procedures, which then I became more compassionate because I learned about some of the things that they are faced with every day. And I'm still working on the love part, honestly, but it's a process that I think is possible.
Thank you. I don't know, Laquan, if you want to add words.
Oh man, you just kind of like to piggyback off what my brother Leon said. Yeah, it is about like kind of like building yourself first, because you don't want to go be having a backpack full of traumatic experiences and trying to go and help other people, and you haven't even addressed the situations in yourself. So yeah, my brother is exactly right. I also think like just a lot of intergenerational trauma that comes with the families that we have to address, and also recognize that it's most times it's not even the problems that we have on ourselves. It's a lot of the problems that's being passed down throughout the families. It's different things like that. So just addressing that, and just always like looking to love one another, and recognizing that everybody is flawed. Everybody has something wrong with them, or something that will be problematic for them in the future. And whether they recognize that or not, just understanding that is something that we all have as humans. And as long as we working on it together, I think we'll always be able to move forward and progress. I mean, a lot of things are happening in people's lives, but most of the times they happen just in different aspects. So,
Thank you. I want to pull from the wisdom of our other folk, President Obama and Congressman Lewis and Brian Stevenson. What do we need what does the future looks like for a community where all of us are cared for and healed, where we're thinking about difference and how to celebrate difference and bring that difference into our healing processes?
Well, there are a couple things that we have to start with. Our individual health depends on our societal health. And, the legacy of slavery, Jim Crow, the experience that Brian describes in his family, part of having knowledge of that is recognizing that we inherited extraordinary strengths, but we also inherited trauma. Violence passes itself down through generations like DNA. Institutions start, they're founded not just on bricks and mortar, but they're also founded on injustice often and slaughter. And so if you don't know that past, then you will oftentimes internalize what you're seeing around you. And so I do think that why I'm motivated, and I mentioned the other day, inspired by so much of what I've been seeing, despite the root tragedy in it, is that there has been as much honest conversation about the topic of race in this country in the last week as has taken place in my living memory, and it is a conversation that is not exclusive to one community, but the whole country, at least a sizable portion of the country is wanting to have that conversation. So that's point number one, I guess I would start with. Point number two is that there is an objective reality that makes us less healthy, right? I can lecture folks about eating right and staying in shape, but if you are living in a community that is polluted and you don't have access to healthcare and you don't have a place where you can buy, fresh groceries unless you take a bus and travel to another neighborhood, then it's hard. It's a lot harder. And I think in the same way that that's true for our physical well-being, the psychological well-being that so many individuals go through, the stresses, the strains, the tensions, those external realities have to be addressed. And part of our knowledge is recognizing, no, those are real and it's going to impact us. And so let's not pretend like we're not putting up with a lot of stuff like that, because otherwise we start thinking, well, what's entirely wrong with us? Now, the final point, though, is I think that, ultimately we have to, having looked reality square in the face, having begun a broad conversation, we then have to take responsibility for doing something about it. And I think that's always the fork in the road, right? If you're dealing with a tough reality, in this case, the reality of racism in our society and that long legacy, then our capacity to take action despite that reality or because of that reality to try to change it, to me is part of health, because you're saying to yourself, no, I have agency. I can make a difference. I can have an impact. I might not be able to change all of it, but I can change this corner of it. I might not be Brian Stevenson and I've got a whole organization, but I'm a young lawyer. I can take one case and serve justice in this one case. I might be, I might not have a column in the New York Times, but in my local community paper, I can write about this thing that's happened and maybe spreads some information and knowledge, right? So ultimately, I think community gets built when each of us has knowledge about the reality that's going on. We've had a conversation about it. And then each of us feels as if we have agency and responsibility for making it better. Because the alternative, and I think this is always the challenge that we have, one alternative is to ignore the reality or paper it over. And I think historically, that has been the tendency, certainly among those who are more privileged in our society. And the white community oftentimes just doesn't want to hear it. Or says you're playing the race card or you're exaggerating. And part of what's happened with videos is suddenly it turns out, well, at a certain point, now you can't ignore it because you're seeing it. But that's a natural human reaction. Uncomfortable realities, let's put it outside of ourselves. But another reaction is to say, yeah, that's the reality, and I am helpless to change it. And that becomes as debilitating and destructive to the soul if you feel as if I have no power. And the thing I always, the thing I've always told my daughters, the thing I used to say to folks when I was community organizing, everybody's got some power. And we give away so much of our power on a day-to-day basis. We sell ourselves short so often. You know, I love John Lewis. I love that man. He has as big of a heart and a soul as anybody I know. But let's face it, when he started marching, he was younger than Laquan, or about his age. Didn't nobody know his name? He didn't have a title. He didn't have a big philanthropy backing him. You know, he wasn't Sugar Ray Robinson. He wasn't an athlete that was famous. So how does this kid, and you know, those of you who meet John's tough, but he's the kind of a little dude. You would not know that that young man could awaken a nation. And that's an example of the power that we each have. And that's why when I see these young people out here right now, I am inspired, because really what's going on is suddenly they're saying, A, we don't accept the status quo, we're angered, shocked, etc. But B, we know we've got some power. And they haven't necessarily figured out in every instance how to exercise that seamlessly and perfectly. That's always an evolution, right? It always takes time to start figuring out how do you use it strategically and tactically. But they're starting to figure out that they have power. And in that sense, I actually think that they will feel better over the long term, even if there's some discomfort and confusion in the short term.
Thanks for that. We all got power. We all got power. I have a final question for the group, and a question, since this is a conversation, an intergenerational conversation. What is it that we need from each other? And if you were to turn to the folk that you're in conversation with on this panel, what would you need from the other person? So I'm going to ask for you, President Obama, to start. What do you need from each other?
Listen, everybody in this panel is doing such great work, has done great work. The main thing I need everybody to do is just keep on doing what you're doing, and not lose faith and not lose hope and not be discouraged. I know that this was billed as an intergenerational panel, so let me pick up just on that theme very briefly to say two things. I do think that young people can learn from old heads like me, but even, and you know, Brian used to be a young man, but he's actually right behind me now. So I'm not sure he qualifies anymore. John's always been young at heart, but I do think that young people can learn from the older generation. Yes, strategy, tactics, we've made mistakes, so no point in make your own mistakes. Don't make the mistakes we made. We can tell you where we screwed up, or we missed an opportunity or what have you. But I think the most important thing that an older generation can provide is perspective. And perspective is useful in the set, and I'll give a very specific example. I said this 2 days ago on our other town hall, when I said I was feeling optimistic because I do not believe that what we're seeing now is actually equivalent to what was happening in 1968. Now, we don't yet know how this is going to play out. And it can take some bad turns, and Lord knows there are some bad forces out there who are looking not at this as a moment of opportunity, but as a moment of fear and resistance and backlash. But I have the perspective as someone older to be able to say that if you had told me that you would see marches not just in LA or Atlanta or New York, but you're seeing them in, you know, small towns in Oregon and Utah, and on behalf of racial justice, and that you would see former presidents and CEOs and you know, part of the power structure even say the words systemic racism and suggest that that's unacceptable. That's not a panacea. That's no guarantee of success, but it is a marker of all the work that people like a Brian or a John have done, or the inspiration that young people like Laquan and Leon, the impact you've had on the larger society in a way that is different than it was 50 years ago. It doesn't guarantee success. And Lord knows this is a society that has a way of, when there's a crisis, putting, you know, put on a front like it's going to do something and then not doing it. But those people out on the streets, that's a sea change. And so a younger generation can hear from an old person and say, oh, you should be inspired, because this is a mark of how things can move if you keep it up. The flip side is older folks, I think, can learn from young people in patience. Right? You know, the great thing about, you know, when I think about Malia and Sasha and their friends, you know, they believed what they believed what they were taught in school. They didn't think that ideas like equality were empty words. And so when they see a society violate those tenets, they're shocked and angry, and they're no, we got to change this now. Whereas I think what happens as you get older is you start getting cynical, and you start saying, you know what, this is how it always is. And so the value of having different generations working together around this is that the generation that's been there can say, you know, I know a little bit about this territory, but the younger folks, they can say, yeah, but we're not stopping here. We got more road to travel, and so let's get up from this place. It might be better than that place, but it's not good enough for us. We got more marching, more walking to do, and that, I think, is what I've been feeling so good about, despite the sadness and anger that I've been seeing.
Thank you, President Obama. I want to go to you, Congressman Lewis. What do we need from each other?
We need to tell people, tell each other to be hopeful, to be optimistic, and to never, ever give up or to get down. I tell you, the past few days been so inspiring to me to see so many young people, so many children, the diversity. It gives me great hope that we're going to get there. It's all going to work out. But we must help it work out. So we must continue to be bold, brave, courageous, push and pull to redeem the soul of America and move closer to a community at peace with itself. But no one will be left out or left behind because of race, or color, or nationality. We have to lay down the burden of hate.
Thank you so much, Congressman Lewis. And we're almost out of time. So I'm going to turn to Brian and Leon and Laquan. And just mindful of time, I want to ask you two, what do you need from each other before we close out?
Well,
let's go with you, Brian.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I need for us, I hope we will all recognize that there is something better waiting for us. There is something that feels more like freedom than any of us have experienced. There's something that feels more like equality, that feels more like justice than what we've experienced. You know, I talk a lot about our past, our history, and sometimes when people hear me talking about slavery and lynching and segregation, they think I want to punish America for what's happened in the past. I have no interest in punishment. My interest is actually liberation. I just believe there is something better waiting for us. And if we're willing to tell the truth, I think what follows truth telling is the opportunity for redemption. My faith tradition is you come in, and if you're willing to confess and repent, there's something that is redeeming and restoring and uplifting. And that's what I think we just have to believe. If you believe things, even if you haven't seen them, you'll achieve things that haven't been achieved before. I had to believe I could be a lawyer, even though I'd never met a lawyer until I got to Harvard Law School. I had to believe I could create an organization that could help people get off death row. And I think that's what we need. And the other part of it is that we do need to recognize the power that President Obama was talking about. We have an incredible opportunity in this moment to do things that have never been done before. And because of the work of people like John Lewis, this is the time to stand. You know, Dr. King talked about seeing the promised land. Many of us are closer than anybody's ever been before, but the closer you get to something valued and protected and precious, the more obstacles emerge. And so we have to be willing to recognize that being able to see it is not the same thing as getting there. And that's why I think this belief that we can't accept a little bit of justice, a little bit of freedom, a little bit of equality. We have to have real freedom, real equality, real justice. That has to continue to sustain how we treat one another. And I feel that way when I listen to Leon and Laquan. I'm so proud of you all for lifting up your true stories, presenting who you are, and then taking what you've done and who you are and doing the things you've done. That's what gives me hope. And I want you to keep inspiring people like me by being reformers in the criminal justice space and doing the hard work you're doing. That's what will sustain and energize me for the rest of my days.
Thank you, Leon.
I believe we need honesty, transparency, vulnerability, and brotherhood. And if I can just, leave you all with this, if you can internalize these words, we must give up to go up. We must give up to grow up. We must give up on the way up and give up even more to stay up. I cannot teach what I do not know. I cannot lead where I will not go. I am because we are because I am. I am my brother's keeper. I am my sister's keeper. I am destined for greatness because I attract what I am. And I thank you all for this opportunity.
Leon, thank you. Laquan?
It is kind of hard coming through after that, man. That was good right there, bro. That was nice. But basically, what I'd like to just leave people with is just more accountability is what I would ask for. Just, if there's any way I could help you all in you all's movement, I understand that, time, geographical locations and different things might play a part. But if there's any way I can help, I'd love to be a part of that. You know what I'm saying? Also, just any way I could just reach out and just put my best foot forward in any way. And also, like, I just wanted to finish off from what you said earlier about being alone. Most times when we standing alone, we think like, oh, we here by ourselves and different things like that, or people don't like us, because our views are different things like that. But I was talking to one of my uncles the other day, and he was just telling me like, most people don't understand their spot or their role in the revolution or in the movement yet. And so when you get up and you are that oddball, or you make that first gesture into creating something different, you may spark something in them that they might not have even known was there. So that's just what I'd like to leave with.
Thank you so much. Mr. President, I think this brings us to a close, unless you have final thoughts.
You know what? I think Leon and Laquan they just modeled what I'm talking about when I say that this younger generation, it's coming, it's inspired. Our job is to support you guys, to hear you, to listen to you, to let you know you matter. And we were talking earlier about mental health. One thing I maybe forgot to mention, because I've been thinking about this a lot. When I am not acting my best towards other people, it's usually because I've got some insecurity. Because I have something inside me that I don't feel good about, right? And so I project that out onto other people. A lot of what we see with respect to racism is somebody who doesn't feel good about themselves wanting to lift themselves above somebody else. The whole basis of the racial hierarchy is status. It's power, it's resources, but it's also psychologically, well, at least I'm not that person below me. The same is true oftentimes with sexism, or people who don't or are afraid of gay people. And part of, I guess, what I want to just lift up is what Leon said and Laquan referred to. When you're able to go ahead and acknowledge, yeah, I'm scared, I'm hurt, I get depressed, et cetera, because I know we were going to be focusing on mental health. That strengthens you, and then you've got a stable base from which to meet the world, and tackle whatever anybody throws at you, because you know yourself and you know what you've been through and you know what you've had to overcome. Sometimes I feel as if those who are in power don't know themselves at all, and so much of what they do, right? When you saw the police officer put his knee on George Floyd's neck, if you're not in yourself frightened and needing to do that because there's something missing in you, strong folks don't do that, right? There are other people in power who sometimes are lashing out or putting other people down. It's because they've got something in them they've got to work through, and so I just want to say, every time I hear people like Laquan and Leon talk, it tells me they're on the right track, because they're not just thinking about what's outside, but they're also thinking about getting in tune with who they are and what they've gone through, and I think that's going to be an important part of this process, and that's political too. This isn't just about policy and budgets. Sometimes it's about just knowing your strength and facing your fears, and you guys are doing that. So I'm very proud of you. Keep it up. And Darnell, thanks for being such a great host.
No, thank you, President Obama. Thank you for your words. Before we let everybody go, the panel portion of this will end, but the conversation will continue. But before we continue, if you join us virtually in silent applause or virtual applause to President Obama for instigating this conversation, giving us the space, and the panelists, the well-respected, admirable Congressman Lewis, Brian Stevenson, also Leon and Laquan. Thank you all for modeling vulnerability and for leaning in.